My name is Bill Corvo. I'm this fella here, and this all three of them. That's my father, Max Corvo. Max was born in Augusta, Sicily, in 1920, uh, and this picture is his his entry picture when he immigrated to the United States. His father was Caesar Corvo. I'll get to that shortly. This is his photograph when he was chief of operations for American OSS special strategic operations in Italy. This is a map of Sicily. I also speak Sicilian as well as Italian. Uh, my grandfather was from the East Coast. This is the province of Syracuse over here. The name of the town where my grandfather was born was Melilli, and he he served in the First World War. He served in the Italian army, and he served in the uh, Italian border with Austria during the war. He was highly decorated. He was with the Bersaglieri, uh, and he ended up being the head of a platoon. Uh, the the platoon was the Italian Ninth Corps, and they had tough mountain fighting. I went up to that area of Italy where he engaged in things, and one of his jobs was to keep a list of the men in his group that were killed, and he had to write letters home to the family. I have this document. It's a handwritten document here in my archive at home. Uh, he ended up earning the Croce di Guerra al Valor Militare for an event that took place uh, at, uh, excuse me, uh, at a bridge in northern Italy where the Austrians were trying to come into Italy, and he was given the task to hold the bridge and stop them from coming in with his men. And it was absolutely brutal. The Ponte di Vidor. And basically, I went there and took pictures of that whole area. Amazing. It was so bad that as they were backing up, the Austrians couldn't come over the bridge. They blew up the bridge in front of them, and then they tried to swim to the other side. And my grandfather and his men threw hand grenades, and the whole river turned red with blood. It was awful. When he returned to Malili after the war, he was married. He had married before the war, just before the war. And he was a member of the Partito dei Combattenti. And he was named the town clerk of the town of Malili, which is maybe 13, 14,000 people. This is my grandmother, Giuseppina. The situation after the war got very tough, especially with the fascists. 1923, they had a terrible fight. The fascists showed up in a truck with clubs at the offices of the Partito dei Combattenti. And as my grandfather later wrote, he says, I don't know what they were thinking. We just got through doing 5 years of warfare, killing people left and right. And these guys show up with sticks. So the veterans pulled out their pistols and took care of the people carrying the sticks that were going to hurt them. What happened then was the fascist prosecutor from Syracuse was going to indict my grandfather and three of his men for what took place, even though they were defending themselves. He decided, that's it, I have to leave. So the town of Malili has a unique relationship with the city of Middletown, Connecticut. Since 1895, the initial immigrants from that part of Sicily came to Middletown, Connecticut in 1895. There was a young kid who was born with 3 legs,
Oh my God.
and his name was Frank Lentini. if you look up Franklin Tinney on the web, you'll see the three-legged man. And one of the fellows who was in Middletown, his brother was with Barnum and Bailey Circus. And he said, hey, can you get in touch with his mother and I'll get him a great job with Barnum and Bailey. So they did that. And this guy ended up being his chaperone, and he bought a house in Middletown, and he started writing letters home to Maloli. 1895. By 1900, there were 3,000 people that moved from Maloli, Sicily, to Middletown, Connecticut. Okay, so my grandfather had come over earlier, about 1912. He's about 18, and he came back to Middletown. And he became a citizen. Yet that was 1923. Became a citizen. Only after he became a citizen did he send for his wife and 3 children, including my father. And in 1929, they were getting ready to leave Sicily, and the fascists decided they were going to intervene and stop him from having his family. He got in touch with one of his friends from the war, who was a prominent fascist. And he says, do me a favor. They're coming here. They're going to be with me. We're not coming back. So they allowed the family to come to Middletown. This is my dad's entry passport documents. He was 9 years old. He had his mother, his older sister, and his younger brother. They left from Palermo on the Conte Grande in October 1929 and landed in New York October 12th. He hadn't seen his father since 1923. This is a little background on Middletown. And basically, it's your typical New England town. It was formed in 1650. By the late 1800s, it was Yankees, old Yankees, and Irish immigrants, a lot of Irish immigrants. The first Italians immigrated, but they were from Abruzzi. And then I tell the story about what happened in 1895. By 1920, almost 5,000 people from Maloli had moved from Maloli to Middletown. But they were told they had to stay in the Italian ghetto. The Italian ghetto, Middletown is right on the Connecticut River. So you have Main Street, and then to the east, you have the Connecticut River. In between, there's land, and that's the area where the Italians were told they should live. This is the grade school class that my dad attended in Middletown, right around the corner from where he was living. And this is 1934. He was 14 years old. This is him. These are his classmates. That school is still existing, building, and it later became the St. Sebastian School, which I attended, the same building. So just to give you, I mean, there's heavy duty Italian American Sicilian population here. This woman was an amazing personality. Her name was Ida Kegman. Ida Kegman was a spinster because the only way you could teach school, you couldn't be married with children and teach school if you were a woman at that time. She was his 6th grade teacher. She had a profound impact on everybody in the Italian American group that attended the school. It was right in their neighborhood. And she taught them that it was important to be a good American, embrace democracy, and strive to achieve the American dream. She was a pacifist. Her father had been involved in the Civil War and had been almost killed. He was severely wounded and almost killed. He was fighting on the Union side. Even though she was a pacifist, she helped my dad understand that sometimes you have to fight for the democracy to protect it. And she stayed in touch with him long after he left the 6th grade. The funny part about this is she was a teetotaler, and she made everybody in her classroom take the oath not to drink. And my father was not a drinker. Even though he was, you're going to like this, even though he's on the board of directors of the Corvo winery when we were in Italy. He did not drink. He was 17. This was during the Great Depression period. And he had to leave school. He never went further than the 10th grade. That was it. And he went to work for this company called the Russell Company. They made all sorts of uh, manufactured a whole bunch of textile uh, operations. And he he created the newsletter for the corporation. He was very interested in foreign affairs, obviously, because his father had to leave the country that he loved and fought for. Uh, and at the age of 18, he was invited to speak before the local Rotary Club on foreign affairs. And in 1938, he was predicting the development of warfare in the Second World War in Europe. He joined in October 1941 before Pearl Harbor. This is a photograph of him at Camp Lee in Virginia. He was a private, went in as a buck private. And he was in the Quartermaster Corps. And so while he was going through boot camp, he was writing all sorts of documents about what he wanted to do to get Italy free from Mussolini and his friends. So his instructor was a fellow by the name of Angier Biddle Duke, the famous Duke family. And he said, hey, what are you writing? And he says, well, I'm writing a plan for the invasion of Sicily and the development of partisan warfare. He says, what the hell are you doing in the Quartermaster Corps? Let me get you out of here. I'll make sure that you get to the right people. You want to meet with Wild Bill Donovan and his group. He gave him a pass and told him, you can, if you've got connections, political connections back in Connecticut, this is what you need to do. So he ended up coming back to Connecticut. He visited with U.S. Senator at that time, Republican, John Danaher. And Danaher, he showed Danaher, all of the development work he did on the invasion of Sicily and the rest of it. And Danaher said, I'm going to hook you up with Wild Bill Donovan, General Donovan, who at that time had just been made the head of the intelligence service, which was eventually became the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS. This fellow on the right is amazing, General William Donovan. Donovan had served in World War I. He had served with the Fighting 69th. He was a colonel, and he won the congressional. He was probably one of the most awarded officers in the U.S. Army's history. Here's the list: Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, Distinguished Service Medal, and Silver Star and Purple Heart. He ended up getting wounded during one of the battles, and even though he was wounded, he rescued about 12 of his men from the field. That's the kind of person he was. He was also very, very bright and active in politics. He was an attorney. He had a law firm in New York City. He didn't have to do what he did. He chose to do what he did. And he was active in the Republican Party, but he was friends with everybody in New York. He ran for governor in New York. He wasn't very successful as a politician, but he got to know Franklin Delano Roosevelt while he was doing all of that. And in 1941, Roosevelt said, you've got to help out with the Office of Coordinator of Information, which was later to become the OSS. Danaher had set up a meeting for my father with Donovan and his people in Washington. So he was allowed to leave the boot camp operation, and he met with a fellow by the name of Earl Brennan. And Brennan was the head of the Italian and Albanian desk for the Office of Strategic Services. my father provided Brennan with his plan for the invasion of Sicily and the recruitment of Americans to infiltrate Italy and establish the partisan network. Brennan talked to him. At the end of the interview, he decided to bring my father into the OSS. This is Earl Brennan here. I knew Earl personally. I met him. I was very active with the OSS Society, and my dad and Earl used to talk and get together in New York and Connecticut on occasion, and I got to know Earl personally. He was amazing. Yeah. He was originally from Keene, New Hampshire. He was a lawyer, and he was also involved in the Foreign Service. He was living in Florence when they recruited him to serve in the U.S. Foreign Service. He was fluent in Italian, French. He was active in the Masons as well. He was active in politics, and in New Hampshire, he ended up becoming a state representative. And he was later recruited into the OSS by another fellow by the name of David Bruce, who was the U.S. ambassador to England, who had been personal friends with him for quite a while. And once Brennan became convinced that my father knew what the hell he was doing and what he was talking about, he said, I'm going to back you up. You put that plan together and start recruiting. When Brennan passed away in July of 1984, he was never married. I took care of taking his remains to the cemetery in New Hampshire where his mother was buried. He loved his mother, and I made arrangements with the cemetery to place him next to his mother. So he was a real friend. What happened after Brennan gave him the green light? What he did is he went back to Middletown, Connecticut, and he was talking to his father. And my grandfather we had a family newspaper. There was a monthly newspaper, anti-fascist, and my grandfather knew everybody that was anybody that had left Italy to get away from Mussolini and company. So he started making contacts for my dad with all of these people who were going to play an active role in partisan warfare once they returned to Italy. He started to recruit Italian Americans from all over the United States, but he actually got the key elements for the strategic office of OSS partisan work was a number of people from Middletown, Connecticut, who we grew up with. So he recruited about a half a dozen people just from Middletown alone, and he took them with them, and they formed the core of the management team for the OSS in Italy. He was 23 years old at the time. While they were preparing the personal stuff, he was also working with OSS intelligence in developing a proper examination of the island of Sicily for an invasion. And one of the things that they did, which is incredible, is they built a scale model. It's a clay scale model, and it was about from here to here was probably about 8 feet. So it was a great big scale model, but it was perfect, and it showed all of the heights and everything else. And they also had the complete data from British naval reports on the best places to land in Sicily if you're going to invade. Okay, so they had the whole island scoped out from a physical standpoint. That, by the way, this I haven't found it at the Smithsonian, but it was given to the Smithsonian. It's probably still there someplace. This is his ID card. He was chief of operations, and if you notice, his number is 45. So when he came in very early, because there were by the end of the war, there were like 24,000 people in the OSS. And this fellow here is an attorney whose name was Vincent Scamperino. His nickname was Scamp. And my dad handpicked him to be the head of Italian secret intelligence. My dad was chief of operations. Scamperino's job was to run the administrative and political operations out of the Rome office. And as my dad told me on numerous occasions, I wanted the politics to be handled by somebody who was more than 23 years old. Okay, and Scamp was an attorney, and he was about 35 at the time. So he put him in charge of the politics, and then he says that way I could go about my business of doing the partisan work. This fellow, his name is Frank Torello. Frank, his people also came from Maloli. He was recruited by my father. He was a lieutenant in the army at the time. And when they did the invasions of Sicily, Torello was named to head of missions to the Aeolian Islands, and especially at Ventotene. And he actually bluffed the Germans into surrendering because he went out on a rowboat with about 5 men, a mix of Italian and Americans, and he had a walkie-talkie, and they landed on the island, and the Germans said, there was like 180 Germans on the island. They said, "What are you doing here, and what do you want?" Well, he says, "I've come to take your surrender. The war for you is over. If you don't surrender, I'm going to have to use this radio, and the destroyers are going to be coming through, and they'll kill you all." So it was a walkie-talkie. It wasn't a radio. It didn't have a connection to any boats, so he basically bluffed the Germans into surrendering. My dad always told me never play cards with Frank at Christmas time. This gentleman was my dad's assistant. His name was Emilio Daddario. And Daddario was amazing. He was originally, his people were from Abruzzi, but he came to Middletown, Connecticut, and became extremely well known because he went to Wesleyan University, which is located here in Middletown. And he was probably the most amazing athlete that Wesleyan ever produced. He was the award-winning running back, unbelievable. Mim was 6'3", about 220 pounds. Okay, my dad was 5'3.5", about 120 pounds. So he said, "You have to be my assistant." And I think he said bodyguard, but I'm not sure. But they worked very closely. And he sent Daddario at a certain point. Alan Dulles and his people tried to get actively involved in the politics in the war in Italy and the partisan war, but they made a mess out of a number of things. And my dad said to Daddario, "I'm sending you to Switzerland. Please put a control on Alan Dulles and his people, and that way we'll know what it is that they want to do, and we don't want them to screw anything up." So Mim ended up moving out of the Rome area into Switzerland, and he stayed there. As the war was ending, he sent him a message, and he said, "Go and pick up General Graziani, who was Mussolini's chief of staff." And he actually took Graziani and 2 other Italian generals as his prisoner. And Graziani later sent them a letter, a thank you letter, saying, "You saved my life because the partisans were going to hang me up next to Mussolini." This fellow in the middle is Captain Sebastian Passanisi. Seb was also from Middletown. He was a well-known architect, and he and my fathers were on the first mission for the invasion of Italy. They had set up a special operation where Captain Passanisi and my dad and half a dozen other OSS personnel took 2 PT boats, and they took a number of Italian Americans from the Detroit area and brought them to Sardinia to begin the liberation process, and also to distract the Germans from the invasion of Sicily. So this took place in June of 1943. It's a little known story, but the first real invasion of Italy was this group of Italian Americans from Detroit. They were taken prisoner by the Italians when they landed, but they told them, the war's over for you. You're going to have to come with us. The Germans tried to take the boys from Detroit away from the Italians, and they said, no, they're our prisoners. Get lost. So Seb was one of the first people to participate in that. Louis Fiorillo was from Middletown. His family came from Maloli, and he lived in Maloli and actually studied at a seminary there until 1937. He was a graduate of Wesleyan. He knew Mendaderio, my dad never was. He was in charge of radio and cryptographic operations in Sicily and Italy for the OSS section. So all of the radio reports from all of the partisan groups had to go through Louis Fiorillo. Sam Fraulino, another same situation. He was a graduate of Boston University Law. He was in Italy already when my dad ran across him. He was working with the Graves administration, sending the American bodies back to the United States. And he said, I think I need your help here. So he ended up being involved in the training, supply, and administration. He set up a lot of the operations that were sent from southern Italy, from Puglia to northern Italy, and he took care of all of the airdrops for weapons and supplies for the Italian partisans. So, as I indicated, the first Italian mission, intelligence mission against Italy was on June 28th, and the target was Sardinia. This is a list of the people, many of whom I've met from Detroit: Anthony Cambodi, John DeMontis, Joseph Papulio, and Vincent Pavia. I met their radio operator, Charles Takei. Papulio ended up being the head of the detective office in Detroit after the war, I met him when I went up for an OSS history session up there. The operation was codenamed Bathtub, and that was the first major invasion before Lampedusa and Pantelleria. 13 days later, we had the invasion of Sicily. Operation Bathtub is a top secret Italian mission. As I told you, they actually left from Tunis, went up with the PT boats and landed. And the whole idea was that they were going to divert German soldiers. And they did. 3 divisions of German soldiers were later sent to Sardinia after that move. And so they weren't available to be on Sicily to stop the invasion of Sicily. Let's see where I am. Okay, this is a very interesting photograph. This is the Castello di Falconara. It's in the southern part of Sicily, west of Gela. And this became the first OSS headquarters in Italy. Full disclosure, my father ended up moving our family to Italy, to Sicily, in the 1960s. I was 11 years old, and he was busy building the largest citrus processing plant in Europe in the plains of Catania. And they had the largest refrigerator warehouse in Italy, and actually in Europe at that time, at the same time. So he took my brother and I to visit this castle. He said, this was my first headquarters. And it's absolutely stunning. And they use it now for weddings and other major events. They have a hotel as well as eating facilities. It's very pretty. This is where they started. This is my father in Augusta, which is on the east coast of Sicily, next to Maloli. My grandmother was not from Maloli. She was from Augusta. And these are her family members. This is my uncle Carmelo, my uncle Rosario, and my cousin Joseph Pepino Catalano. Pep Catalano went with my father. He volunteered to be a partisan, and they were heading towards Palermo. When they got to Palermo, Pep found out that his oldest son, Joseph, had been killed because the Germans left behind. While they were escaping, they left behind a pen, except there was a booby trap. And when he picked up the pen, blew his head off and killed him. So Pep, even though he was one of the first partisans, he had to leave and go back and take care of his family. They played an active role in supporting him. This was taken after the war when he returned to Augusta to say goodbye to everybody. This fellow is amazing. His name is Anthony. He's Guido Pantaleone. He was a lieutenant colonel, very prominent attorney. He had already served in World War I. He didn't have to go to war, but he volunteered, and he was sent to Italy. He was going to do operations in southern France. He told my dad that he wanted to have field experience, and he wanted to go on a mission. So my dad set him up with about a half a dozen men, and then he was heading for Messina, just as the Germans were trying to get out of Italy, out of Sicily. He was keeping track of them and sending the messages back to San Fraulino to let him know where the Germans were. The Germans turned around at a certain point and attacked the 6 men. They took them prisoner, and he was never heard from again. And what happened was Pantaleone was placed, because he was a lieutenant colonel, he was placed in a Jeep. They were going to take him as a prisoner north into Italy. The Jeep, the German vehicle, hit a landmine and he was killed. They didn't know about that, but we found out after the war. Harvard educated, very prominent family. His grandfather had been the president of the Italian Senate, and his father was the senior executive at Westinghouse. So he had 5 kids. I got this from his brother, photograph, and it's at Harvard Law School. A hell of a sacrifice for Pantaleone family, but not forgotten. A lot of people talk about the involvement of the mafia before, during, and after the Sicilian invasion. We know that the whole Sicilian campaign only lasted 38 days, and that U.S. and British troops killed 29,000 enemy troops, captured 140,000 people. U.S. and British casualties were only 4,951 and 19,387 wounded. At the time, there was no active mafia on the island at the time of the invasion. The big problem that the OSS group that landed on Sicily had is George Patton was doing a great job. And as a matter of fact, Patton told them, don't get in our way, because we're shooting at anything that's moving. And if you guys are moving behind us and we don't know what you are, then you're going to get shot. But my dad and his men went forward with their moves to get to Palermo and try and get things organized with the partisan groups. And they ended up getting in touch with General Badoglio's staff people when they had the armistice of Cassibile for the surrender of Italy. So that was very important. Basically, Victor Emmanuel, as you know, if you know your Italian, he set up an interim government after the fall of Mussolini, and he appointed General Badoglio as the head of that government. Badoglio assigned General Giuseppe Castellano to have discussions with the Allies arranged for a peace treaty. When the campaign in Sicily ended in August, he moved forward to complete negotiations with General Walter Beadle Smith. And the armistice was signed by Castellano and Smith on September 18, September 8th, in the town of Casibile in the province of Syracuse. My father was there acting as a special liaison for American intelligence in the negotiations of the armistice. So he was actively involved in that. This fellow was one of the people that he was actively involved with. His name, he was a colonel. His name was Pompeo Agrifoglio. Agrifoglio was originally from Palermo, another Sicilian. The Italian government offered, the new Italian government offered to work with the Allies to get rid of the fascists and Nazis in Italy. And Castellano was the one that made arrangements for my dad to meet with Agrifoglio, who was the head of SIM, which was Servizio Informazione Italiano, which was the Italian intelligence service. At that time, he had been taken prisoner, and they sent him to Nebraska. That's about as far away from Sicily as you can get. So my dad says, send him back from Nebraska here to Sicily, and we'll get things rolling. Guy was extremely bright, had a lot of guts, and worked very closely with the OSS in arranging partisan operations. And he was the key to setting up with the partisan groups, the teams that went in and were dropped in by air, submarine, and on the ground to do all of the partisan work in northern Italy. They worked out there was actually a formal contractual document between OSS and SIM. And it turned out to be, as I indicated, the most productive result during the war. That they basically set up all of the logistics to get the supplies, weapons, radios, and the reporting system straightened out. I told you about Turalo, and this is Ventotene Island. This is the captain I told you about, where he went. He told the Germans he had a force of 500 men on the island who would attack unless they gave up. And he waved his walkie-talkie at them. And they said, all right, let's call it a day. The 6 people that he had, by the way, I talked to Frank about this because Frank was very close with friends with my father here in Middletown. I said, what? There were only 6 of these. He says, that was not enough. He said, the German officer told us, okay, line up, and then they're going to take your weapons. So the 6 guys were running around to get all the rifles away from the Germans. It was ridiculous. So first base was OSS setup was in Palermo after the castle at Falconara. And he moved very, very quickly to get to Brindisi. He wanted to be away from Rome so that the politics of the situation would not run the operations. He didn't want any interference with the partisan operations he was going to be conducting. And they actually set up 24 secret intelligence missions immediately. These were done based on the Corvo plan that he had put together and showed Donovan and Brennan and everybody. The bottom line was they started off recruiting mission leaders and radio operators loyal to the Allied cause from people that had served in the Italian Army and Navy. They trained them in methods of securing intelligence in enemy-held territory, briefed them on the kind of intelligence they were looking for. It wasn't just military, there was political intelligence too. And then they trained them to land them by surface craft, submarines. They used a lot of submarines, or parachuted them out of planes. Then all of the supplies and rearmaments were in the field. They took care of all of that. All of that ran out of Brindisi into northern Italy. The fellow with my father here is they became very close friends. His name was Raimondo Craveri. He was the head of ORI, which is the Organization for Italian Resistance. And it was his father-in-law was the philosopher Benedetto Croce. And Mondo Craveri, uh, I got to meet him as well when I was living in Italy with my family, and he came here to the States, and I acted as his translator on a number of events at OSS functions. The OSS did not have, they didn't care what color politics you had as long as it wasn't fascist. They worked with the communists and the socialist groups. And my father's take on that was anybody that's willing to fight to liberate their country from those people deserves our strongest support possible. Let the Italians worry about the politics after the war. They had to get the Germans and the fascists out of Italy. This is a typical photograph that's available. The Max Corvo archive, by the way, that Robert had alluded to, is thousands of original documents from the OSS time period that were in my dad's personal archive here at home. I would say he kept copies of everything that he did. So there's thousands of pages of documents and original documents and letters from a variety of people, including Donovan and others. And there are thousands of photographs of this type, which is, this is a partisan group that was going into northern Italy, and they were going to be delivered on an Italian submarine. This submarine was the Platino. This is the group that left on this ship. Unfortunately, they were captured and they were tortured and killed. But they did their part to try and liberate their country, and they paid for it, and they shouldn't be forgotten. This is a typical field photograph of the OSS operations with the partisans. They are busy loading their weapons. They were going to engage the Germans in a firefight. So that's what the war looked like from the ground. They also, he had the public relations side of this was very important as well for the OSS to engage. They were getting a lot of information, which they transmitted to the Allied armies. And literally hundreds of messages a week, sometimes a day, were put into the feeding station, and it contained military installations, the battle order, what was happening on the ground, which is important. What's happening to the people, the people that are living on the ground, economic, social, and political information in northern Italy. The OSS also infiltrated the Vatican. Okay, they basically bugged the Vatican's phone lines and telegraph systems, and these are intercepted telegrams from the Vaticans that are in the Max Corvo archive at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. This is regular intelligence. So they basically knew who was talking to who on a regular basis. As the war moved north, he moved his major operational base from Brindisi to Siena. They had a base in Corsica, and they moved their training and resupply headquarters first to Siena and later to Florence. By 1945, there were 24 teams in operation covering every section of northern Italy, manned by personnel that he had recruited. And these teams were in contact with all of the Italian partisans. He was on a first name basis with all of the Italian partisan leadership. And they were getting an average of 125,000 cipher groups each month, and this was 95% intelligence. So it was very effectively done, well put together. What happened was, one of the things that happened was, I alluded to Alan Dulles taking making some moves in northern Italy that were not really good. And basically, what happened was he told partisans in northern Italy to go on the attack against the German SS and the regular army people. Well, they did, but they didn't have any replacement ammunition. They had no food, so he didn't provide them with what they needed. So my dad put together a, uh, a special operation, which he hadn't even thought about, where they were going to do complete resupply, ammunition, supplies, food, everything they needed. So 90,000 men in the various partisan areas, northern Italy. So this is a typical photograph, and a number of his people got pulled over into this in order to make sure that the operations could continue. This fellow on the right is Cardinal Schuster. My father had developed a plan uh, to take Mussolini into custody. Uh, they were evacuating, and he said, "Let's calm things down very quickly. If Mussolini's our prisoner, then we take him out of play. Okay, if he's just lost in the wilderness, he's still operational." So he had his people get in touch with Cardinal Schuster, whom he knew was talking to Mussolini, and told him, "Why don't you have Mussolini let's set up a meeting. I'll meet with Mussolini at your office in Milan, and I'll take him prisoner, and we'll fly him out of there to Rome." He was gonna set up like a Piper Club type airplane, land in San Siro racetrack in Milan, and then pick up Mussolini with a group of uh, allies and partisans, then fly him to Rome, and he would be held for public trial. General Eisenhower eventually said, "Let the Italians take care of the Mussolini situation." Mussolini reneged and didn't show up. He went north, as we're all aware. Cardinal Schuster did try to help. This is a typical photograph of the OSS archive photographs in my dad's archive. Okay. Um, I talked to Dario about this, and he said that situation was probably, from a human point of view, one of the most disgusting things that he's seen, but he understood how it happened, how it came to happen, and how people took their revenge. On the left, you have Benito Mussolini, who's been dead for a while, and his head is on his dead girlfriend's body, Claretta Petacci. And Mim was in Milan when they brought the bodies in, and they had been killed, and they were out. They were dead for probably a day and a half, and then they brought them into Milan, and they hung them up. And I said, "Well, how long were they there?" He says, "They were there for like a day and a half." I said, "Holy cow!" Then when they cut them down, then all hell broke loose. Then you could see this guy's kicking Mussolini's head with his boot. The war was over. So basically, my dad was trying to continue working with American intelligence with the friends that he had made on the partisan groups, which included every major political leader in Italy. And he became he made the grade of major. They were going to make him a lieutenant colonel. He says, "I'm leaving the army. The war is over." He wanted to stay, but Dulles did not want to have anybody from the OSS Italian section involved any further, especially the secret intelligence division that my dad had, because they knew too many things. My dad described one of the things that Dulles did, and he said it was the first Bay of Pigs operation. He basically, that's when he told the Italian partisans to go after the Germans, and then didn't do anything to help them. So I've got all of his medals. He got an official knighthood from King Umberto, the Italian War Cross, and the Lateran Cross from the Vatican. This is his certificate of knighthood. I have that here. My dad never used to hang up his medals or anything. He kept them in a closet. I put them out because unbelievable. This is an important note from his grade school teacher, Ida Kagan. She always called him Biagio. She never called him Max. You did make good and help your country. One might say your countries in a big, fine way. I congratulate you and I wish for you real work for humanity for the future. Your old teacher and friend, Ida Kagan. He kept that letter where he could see it, not like his medals. So that's the abbreviated version of Max Corvo of OSS. Full disclosure, my mother was also in the OSS. Her name, Adiolaikas. My mother's name was Mary Donovan. Her grandfather came from County Cork and landed in the United States when he was 3 years old in 1853. So my mother was a secretary in Cleveland, Ohio. And she was working as a secretary when Pearl Harbor got bombed. And she was very upset. And she said, I'm not going to go and just do secretarial work at a law firm. I have to help my country. So the day after Pearl Harbor, she went down and gave her resignation to the law firm and went down to the Army and joined the Army. And they needed people like her in London because they were using English secretaries, the OSS. She ended up in the OSS in London. And she spent the whole war in London with the OSS and then returned and was working directly for General William Donovan. I kidded her. I said, was that a cousin of yours? She got up, oh, she wasn't my cousin. I said, well, you don't know. In any event, her job was to interview people that had been recommended for medals that were in the OSS as soon as possible because General Donovan was going to leave and he wanted to personally award members of the OSS teams their medals. So she met my father while doing this interview. And about halfway through the interview, he says, don't worry, the general recommended me for the medals. I'm all set. What are you doing for dinner? And they got married 2 weeks later. Amazing. So I'm a child of the OSS. So that's my story.
Fabulous.
And
Amazing.
let me show you something else very quickly.
They should have named an airport after you.
They're naming a number of things after. This is, can you see this? Can you see this?
Yeah, wow.
Okay. Basically, I was very close with both of my parents. And my dad used to take me with him. The OSS Society's offices were in New York, and they would have meetings, and he'd say, I have to go to a meeting in New York. Do you want to come? It's the OSS. So I went down, and I ended up knowing all of these people that had worked in the OSS from all over the United States, and they worked all over the world for OSS because it's the OSS Society. And they did a symposium in the 1980s, and at that time, I was a history major. I graduated. I went to Wesleyan University along with all these other people, and I was a history major. And I loved history. And he said, we're going to do a symposium, international symposium sponsored by OSS in Washington, and we need somebody that is familiar with everybody to be basically the chief of staff of support. So I went down and I was there for 3 days, and we had a great symposium. And just to give you a taste, almost every living CIA former director was at that thing. And one of my jobs was to keep them apart from each other. So this is the poster, the official poster of a movie that I made with a good friend of mine in Italy who specializes in Italian documentary films. His name is Ezio Costanzo, and he used the documents that I showed you today. Plus, I gave him access to the Max Corvo archive because I scanned every page of those documents. I have it in my computer along with all of the photographs. Those are available. Trinity also has an office in Rome, so they can be available to people in Italy. I put the movie together with Ezio, and I don't know the movie business. This is my first movie, but we won the New York Film Festival Award for Best Documentary. There's two major Manhattan film festivals. We won the Rome International Film Festival Award for Best Documentary. We've got the Dumbo Film Festival down here, New York Liftoff Film Festival, half a dozen film festivals in Italy and Sicily. And we just won one in Arkansas. So we're all over the place. And I'm negotiating right now to get this film English and Italian versions. We're negotiating with Amazon Prime, and I'll let Robert know when that's ready to go. And if not, then I'll make it available to everybody on this call and elsewhere. So that's
Yeah.
that's basically the short story.